This month we're making the poinsettia flower blocks, and the pattern has everything broken out into the cut sizes already. Your pieces are all in one big piece and you will need to cut them to the sizes it says. So to start, we have 5 white fabrics, and those will take the place of where it says 20 beige rectangles and 10 beige squares. You're going to get all of them out of the white. Then it says you have 10 red squares. We actually have 5 strips of red that you'll get those squares from. And it says 5 black squares. You have just 1 strip of black and you will get all the squares from that. And then it says you have 10 green squares. Again, you only have 5 strips and you'll need to cut those squares. We are making 5 blocks, so you can mix and match your reds, greens, and whites however you want. The blocks are all the same, other than the fabrics will be a little bit different. I'm going to cut all 5 of mine at once. If that makes you nervous, don't do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is clean cut 2 edges. And my biggest pieces I need out of this are 2 4-inch squares. So I don't have 8 inches going the short way, so I want to cut a 4-inch strip off of the long edge. I'm going to just line up my 4-inch mark with the long clean cut edge, and really any mark that's going to be able to make it so I can cut all the way across the fabric with the short clean cut edge. I'm going to cut. I'm going to move those out of the way very gently. And it's 2 4-inch squares. So I'm going to move my ruler back to 8 inches. So it's an 8-inch mark on my short clean cut edge. Any marks on the long edges, cut. Move my ruler back again to the 4-inch mark. Same thing with lining up my edges. And cut. So that gives me my 2 4-inch squares of each. I'll gently move those back into place. The next thing I need is 4 1.5 by 3-inch rectangles of each white. So 1.5 times 4 is 6 inches. So I can just put my 6-inch mark on my short clean cut edge. My 3-inch mark on the long clean cut edge. Let me just double check that measurement before I cut. Yep, 1.5 by 3. I'm going to cut and then cut across. You have this scrap that's big enough for something on the end. Okay, so then I'm going to back it up by 1.5 inches. So I'm going to back up to the 4.5-inch mark on my ruler on the short end. Any marks along the long edge to keep everything straight. Cut, back up to the 3-inch mark. Cut, and back up to the 1.5-inch mark. And cut, and there's all my white rectangles. From my red strips, I need 2 3.5-inch squares from each. So again, my first step is to clean cut 2 edges. And I didn't mention it earlier, but I did spray all my fabric with spray starch, best press, or magic sizing. Your choice. You may have noticed I'm using the big rotary cutter. You can cut through more layers easier with the big one. Okay, I clean cut the 2 edges, so now I can either rotate my mat or I'm just going to walk around. 3.5 times 2 is 7. So I'm going to put my 3.5-inch mark on the long edge, my 7-inch mark on my short clean cut edge, and cut, and move my ruler back to the 3.5-inch mark. Again, I always have marks on the long edges to keep everything straight. There. And cut, and there's all my red squares. From my black strip, I need 5 1.5-inch squares. So as always, clean cut 2 edges. And then 1.5 times 5 is 7.5. So I'm going to put my 1.5 inch mark on the long edge and my 7.5 inch mark on the short edge. When that's all lined up, I'm going to cut. I'm going to back my ruler up to the 6-inch mark. And as always, having lines on the long edge to keep everything straight. Cut. Then I'm going to move back to the 4.5 inch mark and cut. Then to the 3. And cut. And finally to the 1.5 inch mark and cut. And that gives me all 5 black squares. The final thing we need to cut is 2 green squares from each green strip. They are 4 inches. So clean cut 2 edges. And I don't know if you've noticed, but when I'm cutting this many layers, I make sure that I'm through before I move my ruler. Okay, I've clean cut my 2 edges. And then it's going to be 2 times 4 is 8. So I want my 8-inch mark on my short clean cut edge, my 4-inch mark on the long one. And cut, and cut, and move my ruler back to the 4-inch mark. And cut, and now everything is cut out for these blocks. The first thing we're going to sew together is the green 4-inch squares with the white 4-inch squares. Just make sure it's the same greens with the same white so that they match. And so on the back of every single one of the white squares, we're going to mark either one line diagonally or using a magic wand or similar tool, put the score line on the corners and mark 2 lines. We're making half square triangle units, and we have done a lot of those this year, so this should not be anything new. So I'm going to mark them all and then match them right sides together with whichever green I chose to go with that white. And we're going to sew either 1/4 inch away from your center line or on your marked lines. I've stitched all my greens and whites together, and I did say this was a half square triangle unit. We are going to make it a little bit more than that. We're going to actually make them into 1/4 square triangle units. So place it on a cutting mat. The first thing we're going to do is to cut the square apart between the stitched lines. Don't move your square yet. Now we're going to cut it in half on the diagonal the other way as well. You can place your 45-degree line on one cut edge if you want to help you keep that straight. And we're going from point to point and cut. So what I end up with from each square is 4 1/4 square triangle units. Now I am going to press these so the seam is toward the green. So we're going to do that with all of these. We'll end up with 40 half square triangle unit or 1/4 square triangle units like this. Each square set is going to yield, they're now they're now just triangles, okay? It's going to yield 4 triangles, 2 with the green on the right and 2 with the green on the left. We are only using the ones with the green on the right, so you can just take all the ones with the green on the left and set them aside. You can use them for something else. You could actually sew them together like that and you would have squares. Doesn't matter. You can throw them away if you want to. Now that we have pulled out all of our triangles that have green on the left and set them aside, we're not using them, we're going to take our red squares and cut them in half once on the diagonal. There we go. So then we're going to take our 2 color triangles and match up those long edges as well as you can. Like mine is My red triangle is a little bit smaller, so I've just centered it. We're going to be trimming this down later. And we're going to be sewing 1/4 of an inch away from the long edge. Do remember this is on the bias, so you don't want to stretch it. Just like with the greens and the whites, we want to match the same red on all 4 with the same green and white. I've stitched all my red triangles to the green and white triangles, and I pressed toward the red. Now all of these units need to be trimmed down to 3 inches. If you bought the Tucker trimmer, this is the perfect time to use it. So we would put the 3-inch line on our diagonal line, the other diagonal going through the seam on the green and white. It's lined up. Cut this side and this side. Then I'm just going to rotate, and now I'm going to put my 3-inch mark on the line that I just cut. I should still have the one that's marked 3 inches going on the long seam. Cut and cut. If you don't have the Tucker trimmer, you can use a square ruler. In that case, half of 3 inches is 1.5. So I want my 1.5 mark here on my square ruler where it comes in and meets on that diagonal line to be sitting right on top of the center point on my diagonal line running on the long seam. And then cut, cut, rotate. Again, my diagonal line can be on that long seam. And now I want to put my 3-inch marks on the 2 sides that I just trimmed. And cut. So I'm going to trim all 20 of these units into 3-inch squares one of those 2 ways. Once I have all the units trimmed, then I'm going to find the rectangle that matches the fabric already in the unit, and it is going to be sewed to the long side of the green triangle. So just like I'm showing it here. So we're going to do that on all 20 blocks. After adding the white rectangles, I pressed out toward the white rectangle. You could press either way, it doesn't matter. So now we are ready to put our block together. And we're going to be using a partial seam. So we're going to start with just one of our pieced units and our black square. Going to put it right sides together down on the red, on the corner of the red. And we are going to start stitching at least 1/2 inch down. You're not going to want to go too far or you won't be able to finish the seam later. So we want to come down about here, and I did back stitch and then just sewed off the edge. Here's one that I have sewn this partial seam, and you can see, maybe I have globs of thread here, but where I back stitched, I wanted to back stitch because I don't want it to pull out, and then I sewed off the edge. Then on all of these, after we sew the seam, it's going to get pressed away from the black square toward the red. So once I'm to this point, I can get my next unit, and again my black is going to be in the corner of my red. But now I'm going to sew the whole seam, so I'll just flip it up over and sew from end to end, again pressing toward the red. So here's the one that I've done that. Once I get to this point, I'm ready to add another piece, and again the black is always in the corner of that red triangle, so this is a complete seam again. So here's the one with my complete seam, and I pressed out toward the red, and now I am ready to add my last piece. So I need to fold this piece back so I don't catch it, and then again I'm going to be able to sew from end to end like this. And here's one that I've done that. So all I have left to do is finish sewing this partial seam. So I'm going to fold it over like this, and the hardest part is going to be getting in here where we started our seam before, but I'm going to sew from here all the way off the end, and then I will press toward the red. I've stitched up all my partial seams, and here are my 5 finished poinsettia blocks. They should be 6.5 inches square at this point. And just a reminder, like I said before, you can use whichever green with whichever red with whichever white you want. It's just probably a good idea to keep them the same in each block. Although poinsettias have multicolored leaves, so if you want to mix them up, that's up to you.